Mr. Brian Graff. How you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing fine. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
No, likewise. And, Brian Graff is the CEO of American Retirement Association. Before we dive into, who, what you do as the CEO of the ARA, I was kind of hoping maybe you can take it from the beginning, tell us your origins.
Well, I do like to tell the story of my 403B story. So my parents are public school teachers in New York State, first in the city, and then they moved out to Long Island when I was a little bit older. And they were your typical public school teachers. My mom actually was a kindergarten teacher for I think 36 years. Um, and I remember when I think I was either 10 or 11, and I'm sure I was like in my room playing Atari because that's how old I am. And my dad dragged me out of my room and said, "I want you to listen to this." That this, I still remember this like white formica table, and with these really hideous red chairs. It was sort of the style of the '60s, I think, and they still had this when I was growing up in the '70s. And there was a guy there telling them that they should, start saving in one of these 403B plans, and that's the way those, as you probably are aware, in public schools, that's the way those plans are sold on an individual account basis, right? And I unfortunately they've passed away, and those plans no longer are around. But I do remember um one, listening to this guy talk to them, and two, the fact that my mom would say was in a position where she had a some extra money to um buy her grandkids, stuff, and take them on trips. And the fees that they were paying for these were not what we would describe as very competitive today. But I think it's important to remember that, this guy did come to our house, and actually came to our house a few times. And, regardless of what the fees were, they actually did save, and they probably wouldn't have if that person hadn't had done what they had done. So, I mean, I think what it taught me, or what the impression it made upon me, was that I think sometimes we get a little bit hung up on the whole thing about fees and investments, and there's a lot of hand wringing that goes on, and we forget about the importance of saving in the first place and how much to save. Not to suggest that those things that I mentioned aren't important, but I also think that there's a lot of value in the conversations and education that the industry provides to average people who wouldn't otherwise know or be astute enough to save on their own. And for me, I mean, I don't want I don't want to sit there and say, "Oh, I knew at 11 that this was my destiny." In fact, that's not what I thought I was going to do when I went to college. But when I did take my first Arista class in law school, I did kind of feel that connection to my parents, and the benefits that they had, not only by being able to save in a 403B, obviously also having a defined benefit plan that, unfortunately, a lot of folks today do not have the advantage of being part of. That sort of led me. It's a kind of part of what drives me is that importance of being able to have as many people as possible, hopefully everyone, in a position to have some type of comfortable retirement. That's really the goal.
You said something interesting. So did your parents involve you in that conversation, and that conversation about the retirement annuity contracts and the whole sales pitch? Just curious, what do you think the idea was behind that? Because typically, right, when there's adult conversations going on, typically it's just the adults.
They're teachers, right? So it's sort of instinctual to them to involve the kids in things that they think the kids should start thinking about. And my parents, having experienced the depression a little bit when they were growing up. Um, the the depression that happened in the in the 30s, the 20s and 30s. Um, as a consequence, they were savers instinctively. And I think, myself growing up, I think my father probably thought that I spent too much money on stuff. And so maybe this was his way of kind of, trying to get me to hear about the importance of saving for the long term and saving for retirement.
I can kind of see how all of that played into, where you're at now, where you have these parents that are, educators, and that additional information that you shared, that, they were brought up during the Great Depression. And so the savings priority was there for them. And they've clearly ingrained that in you, being the CEO of the, American Retirement Association. But maybe walk us through a little bit, maybe a couple of other examples of how that desire for education, that desire to save, to be part of something greater than yourselves. Can you walk us through a little bit more of that process?
Well, a lot of that is my mom. So my mother, probably the biggest influence in my life. She was an incredibly smart woman. She graduated Hunter College. I think she was 19 years old when she graduated. She probably should have gone to medical school. She wanted to. She got accepted. Um, but at the time, they were they didn't hand out scholarships to women. Um, and because there's this incredible bias against women professionals, because they just you know it was a it was a it was an unfortunate world that she grew up in. And so because of that, she was a fantastic kindergarten teacher, but I think she spent a life feeling some regret, some missing piece of what she could have accomplished having the platform of being a medical doctor. And I think she instilled in myself and my siblings the message of making a difference, and the importance of, if you've got the opportunity to be successful, what's the point of having that opportunity unless you can make a difference in whatever way that is. That's something that I've really carried with me. I wanted to be successful, but in doing so, I wanted to um, do something that actually helped people in some way. I didn't know what that was. I certainly didn't, when I was going to college and even law school, I didn't completely follow the path, or see the path, excuse me, in the future. But I knew that whatever I was going to end up doing, I wanted to do some good. And, I've been very fortunate that that's what drove me to go to DC. That's what drove me to kind of work in government. And I've been very fortunate that the membership has allowed me to have this platform to, really drive the mission, which is to make it so that every working American has the opportunity to achieve a comfortable retirement.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because you said something that really resonates with me. In that, if you have an opportunity to be successful, take advantage of that. Do it. You clearly took advantage of those opportunities, and obviously all of that really stemmed from your upbringing, with parents being educators and them instilling in you, right, that education is a huge factor of success. Can you walk us through what your experience was with going to the Ivy Leagues and studying? What was your experience like?
Well, I mean, I think, in both instances, they're, great educational experiences. I didn't have a silver spoon. So, I had to work through college and I had to work through law school to pay for it. Like, frankly, most Americans have to do today. So, I mean, I do think that, coming from more of a working class background, allowed me to have a better perspective, uh, in both of those educational experiences. I mean, I mean, probably the best example. A lot of, I went to law school, and at that point, I was like, I hadn't decided that I want to be a retirement policy person or an advocate for America's retirement systems. But in fact, I went to law school. I thought maybe I'd go into teaching. I really loved crim law. I thought maybe I'd do public defender work. I really did like crim law a lot. Still do. Um, but what I knew I didn't want to do was be an investment banking lawyer, which literally half the class in my law school, probably that was their dream, right? To go work at some giant law firm and work on mergers and acquisitions and make oodles of money. And nothing turned me off more than the idea, the prospect of doing that kind of work. It's just like, what's the point? So I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Sorry, exactly. But I knew it had to have some sort of public service component. And, I ended up, something, when I took that ERISA class, there was something that I connected with. And maybe it has to do with, the fact that my parents were teachers, but it was something that I felt like could reach so many people. And I was particularly interested in the notion that the retirement world seems to be divided in half. There's about 60% of the population that has some type of retirement program. And then there's this 40% of the population, roughly speaking, that doesn't. And that troubled me. And, why is that coverage gap and I even, I remember talking about it in law school. And so that kind of stuck with me. And my desire to try to do something about that has really been, for me, the driving force in terms of what I want to accomplish.
What was it about criminal law that you enjoyed versus, ERISA?
In law school, you talk about the cases that were wrongly decided, the innocent who should have had better representation. It's that justice thing that you sort of inherently have, at least some people have, and when they go to law school. And so I think that was a different way of making a difference. It was more of a one-on-one type of thing versus a macro kind of thing. Um, uh, my, I have, in addition to being a lawyer, I also would, I'm a CPA, although I don't practice as an accountant. So I had I had such a financial background. It would have been kind of, I don't know. I could have done both. I felt like
Mhm.
it made more sense. Logic pushed me towards the retirement world more than it did the criminal one.
So I ask this because I feel like 9 out of 10 times the answer is always the same. Would you say that you accidentally just stumbled across ERISA, or was this, you saw the course, you knew what it was, high level, and you determined this is what I'm going to do?
There was some consciousness involved with the decision, but I certainly didn't envision the American Retirement Association. So at least at the time, it was more, hey, I could be a lawyer helping people make sure that they get good benefits.
And so, obviously all of this journey up until this point, you mentioned things such as, having to work, having to pay for your schooling, go to school. I mean, all of that, that's a lot.
I try to remind my kids that all the time. When I was your age, I worked in high school and I had to do my homework and all they do is look at me and like, you're such an OG. Would you stop talking?
I feel like that's sometimes overlooked. Do you care to share, what part of your journey people didn't see that made you successful? Again, the sacrifices, the routines, the failures, the habits, the mentors. Can you dive a little bit into that during your college years?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have some really good mentors of various kinds. I mean, in college, in law school, peers that I've had the opportunity to talk to and share objectives and goals. But ultimately, I think for me, the core comes, particularly from my mom, that drive to don't waste it. You've been given a gift of a decent sized brain. Don't waste it and take that opportunity and be able to take care of yourself and your family, but make a difference in this world. And that was 100% constant in growing up. And I'm glad to see that I feel like I've followed her teachings. in that regard. I mean, it's hard to pick on, to identify one thing, but I do owe a great deal to her in terms of valuing the importance of making a difference. Even if it's, it doesn't have to be in a big way. She used to say, whether it's volunteering, even if it's being a great parent and making sure that your kids understand the importance of being helpful and caring about others in the community. There's so many ways that people can demonstrate, and to demonstrate the fact that they value everyone and that they can help individuals, whether it's in a big or in a small way. All of that does make a difference, and I think that's something that, um, she was a great lady. I'm getting misty eyed here a little bit.
Thank you for sharing that because I think the saying is true, right? Behind every great man is a great woman. That can be a mom, that can be a spouse, that can be a friend, a sister, but there's truth in that because I resonate with what you're saying in that, you know, um, you know, mothers are special to the sons, right? Sons value their mother's first love, and I can see that just the way you speak about her, and clearly her values really, they were really brought on to you, the education, the want to help, other individuals. And I think that's a beautiful thing because sometimes we need to have greater why. Why am I doing things? I think your why, part of your why was probably I want to make my mom proud. I want to be able to accomplish the things that perhaps she didn't have the opportunity to accomplish. And so I think that probably was a factor, right, in your motivation to go to Cornell, go to, to these universities where, you became, an attorney and a CPA and, CEO of AR. Is that fair to say?
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than. I mean, obviously, you always want to make your parents proud of you, but it's really more than just that. You want to actually fulfill you know, what the objectives, the dreams were for her, and you know, this has been my wife for a very long time. Is I wanted a world where as many Americans as possible. I mean, frankly, I'd love it to be worldwide, but we still haven't. Like, first, we have to accomplish America. Have that meaningful, real opportunity to save, invest, build for the future for themselves and for their families. Wealth equity is a incredibly important subject, an incredibly important topic in this country, and that's my why. And it starts with a little bit, and the objective obviously is that that little bit grows to something more. Ultimately, we've got to try to make it so that everybody has that opportunity for, to be able to accumulate and grow some savings and have an opportunity to share in the prosperity and build that wealth for themselves and for their families.
Absolutely. And, again, your why was so strong and is still strong, clearly, that, you've been part of, the American Retirement Association for 3 decades. Is that accurate to say?
This is my 29th year.
29, we'll round up 30, right? Um, how have you, how have you been able to keep such a demanding role and being able to thrive for so long? What's your secrets, if you don't mind sharing?
When you care about what you're doing and you have that why and you have that mission, um, that's the driver. So it it really it, I'm not sitting around saying I hate my job. I like what I'm doing because I care about what I'm doing, and I feel very fortunate that I'm in a position to be able to say that. Not everyone has a job that they like doing and feel good about. I feel bad for people in those positions because, like I said, I am very fortunate in that regard. But I'm very mission focused. We've made some progress, but it's incremental and a lot more needs to be done. I think there are a lot of, societal challenges that we face in this country are equity based, and I think there's a lot of there is a lot of discussion, rightfully so, about racial equity, but what we don't talk about is the wealth disparity issue enough to be, in my belief. Now, some of it's connected, but it's not entirely connected. And I think in many ways, although there certainly continues to be systemic racism in the country, I think the wealth disparity is more intractable at this stage than the racism. I'm not trying to make judgments. Obviously, both are issues, but I do feel that certain, the election in New York City, other debates that have happened, I believe, are reflective of frustrations among a lot of Americans about the fact that they don't feel like they have a fair shot at that American dream. And that is a critical issue as a society that we have to address. We have to address that issue in a meaningful way because I think it will continue to create rifts in our society.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that and obviously I'm a member of, ASPA and, PSEA, and I have the membership credentials and all that. So one of the things that I love about just all of the associations is that you do care. Constant webinars, constant, not just webinars, but proposals to Congress, Capitol Hill of trying to simplify the retirement plans, make it more equitable, more accessible, right? Which aligns with what you're referencing to. Is there anything currently or, just ideas flowing around where you think that issue, even though it can't be solved with just one idea, are there things that are being proposed that, might take a shot at lessening that gap?
Yeah, no, for sure. One of the areas that, so there are certainly, we've been very involved in states, working with states like the one that you live in, California. I remember going to Sacramento 20 years ago to meet with Kevin DeLeon, who was a state senator at the time, to pitch in this idea. And I remember, ironically, there was a proposal to cut teachers' pensions, and the teachers union, the CTA, the California Teachers Association, did a sit-in in the Capitol. And so I had this meeting with Kevin. They kind of stormed the Capitol building, and they had to shut it down. And poor Senator DeLeon was stuck with me for like 3.5 hours because he had no place to go. But I sold them on this idea. And, eventually, working, it wasn't just my idea. There was others involved, including a unusual marriage between the Brookings Institute and the Heritage Foundation, which is still has not occurred ever since, to create this state-based auto IRA program for employees without a plan. That now, eventually that became CalSavers, which you're familiar with. And then, and it's been incredibly successful. And employers like it, the employees like it. It's really, I think there's over $2 billion accumulated in CalSavers. So it's a great success story about how a program can start the process of letting everybody in the state start to accumulate wealth and savings. And we've been working with Pew and AARP with, proposals to, in other states. I think we're up to a dozen that have been implemented. There's like 6 others that are in process. But ultimately, we'd like to nationalize that idea, so that every employee that doesn't have a plan would at least be able to participate in some state-based auto IRA program.
That's a great example of taking your shot at that wealth equity gap, because it's not just CalServers. You got Oregon, you have all these states that have adopted this.
New Jersey and New York just went live. We're close. I think we'll have Massachusetts. I'm optimistic. Will's been working pretty hard with the governor's office as well as the legislature in Massachusetts. We're hopeful there. But there's another area that really hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves that I do want to mention, and that I'm going to start talking about more and more. And that's the sector of our economy that is systemically classified as an independent contractor. There are certain sectors of our economy where a substantial percentage of the workforce is classified as an independent contractor. And I'm not just talking, I am including in that quote gig workers, right? But it's not just gig workers. I mean, there are a lot of people who work out in California in the entertainment industry, in the fashion industry, and they're just always, and they don't make enough to be in one of the guilds. So, but they work in makeup, they work in electrical, they work in construction, they work, they're all behind the scenes. I'm not talking about actors here, I'm about people behind the scenes, and they don't have any facility to save. There's no plan because they're not employers. They're not part of the union. They can qualify to be part of the union and get the benefits that the unions provide because they don't make enough money. And, you know, and there's people in other states who work in similar electrical construction service jobs. They're classified as independent contract. I can't fix every battle. I'm not here to debate whether they should be or should not be classified as independent contractors. That's for someone else to fight. But what I can say is that they don't really have any way to save. And we're talking about 25 million people.
Mhm.
It's not a small number of Americans here. And I think we need to try to figure out some way to address that too. And that might also be a national program.
So, are you thinking perhaps proposing an update to the state auto IRAs, right?
Provide access. But one of the tricks is going to be what the reason the state program works so well is automatic enrollment, right? So, um, how can you do that with independent contractors? How would that work? These are things that we're starting to explore and think about. But I think again, this is a sizable percentage of the population. And just to ignore, just to say, well, they're not employees. So, that's not acceptable to me.
I think, again, just those two goals, one of those you're already achieving. I mean, that again exemplifies your mission, right? That desire to help the American population with retiring. Again, stemming back to your childhood, your parents as educators, that really does kind of have this full circle, right? Of like your mission, the way you were born, and just the things that you've learned along your way. Would you be able to share with us perhaps, what's the process that the American Retirement Association takes when proposing a legislative change to Congress? Like what are the typical steps? What are the typical issues that usually occurs during this process, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, a lot, and oftentimes it bubbles up. It's not top down. So I mean, most times. I mean, the only thing that's more top down. I mean, I'm probably the biggest driver of the coverage mission, and that's I'm grateful to the membership for being supportive. I mean, most of the membership is involved in the industry or involved as a plan sponsor like yourself, so they already work. So they're not necessarily thinking about the people that don't have it, right? But the support I get from the membership around trying to solve for coverage is extraordinary. So putting the coverage issue aside, let's say we want to propose better disclosures around fees. That would come up from the membership. It would be, advisors or plan sponsors. We would hear, from them directly, I can't figure this out. How am I supposed to, how can I make, comparisons between potential providers if I don't understand what they're charging? I don't want to, my job is to make sure that my client doesn't get sued. Right. So, we need help in that regard. So it bubbles up, we sort of vet it, perfect it, go back, test it in terms of getting feedback from members like yourselves. And then once we've got all that, we're in a position to be able to say, listen, this is what the community wants. And that's a very powerful place to be.
So I appreciate you sharing that because I've heard, um, I don't want to call them rumors, but um, whispers about a Secure Act 3.0. Is that something that's been?
At first I thought, well, why are we going to call it Secure 3.0? I mean, can we come up with a different name? But and to the staff's credit, I think they're right. They kind of, said to me, retirement policy is kind of, as very nichey. And the number of members of Congress who really understand what's in these bills is not very large, a couple dozen maybe ish. We've got 538 members of Congress. Retirement's really the only, I think at this point, maybe the only thing left that's bipartisan, truly. I mean, it's not a long list, and we want to keep it that way. And the Secured 1 and 2.0, it's like a brand now. Average rank and file members know it. We don't have to educate them about it. They know it's retirement and they know it's bipartisan. So why mess with a good thing? And it's a pretty persuasive argument. So yes, I mean, there's a number of proposals that are cooking in the pot that, a bunch of them are coverage related. As I mentioned, some others are reforms for reform ideas. I mentioned maybe something on fee disclosure. There's certainly an interest about doing more automatic enrollment. We certainly would like to finish the job and allow for B plans to have collective investment trusts to help reduce fees for participants. It'll be a bunch of stuff. I think there's a lot of interest in trying to promote lifetime income. So one of the things that I'm very proud of, in the almost 30 years I've been doing this, and frankly, from my time on the Hill, was the idea of keeping retirement policy bipartisan and keeping that mantra that this should be bipartisan, that the best ideas are vetted on a bipartisan basis. And we're very committed to trying to keep it that way, notwithstanding this environment, which is admittedly quite challenging.
What challenges have you faced when trying to keep this bipartisan structure with retirement policy?
When certain ideas get politicized, ESG investing was probably the most recent example where, you know, I think both sides kind of went over the top and one pro, one against. And when I say over the top, just taking it to the extremes, what we don't want to do in the retirement policy sphere. Because the truth of the matter is, our view is the least qualified to decide what's the right investment options for participants and beneficiaries is the U.S. government. So really that's up to investment committees, and with their institutional retirement plan advisors, they're in the best position to make these kinds of decisions, to do the vetting, to do the benchmarking, not the government. And I would say the same thing on the private asset side. Now we've got the administration kind of pushing that. It's not that we necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think there's some arguments for some inclusion of private markets in investment portfolios, and they've been used in defined benefit plans for decades successfully. But again, it shouldn't be a requirement. It should be something that is an option for investment committees and plan fiduciaries to vet and consider and assess. And so asset neutrality is a core principle for the organization. And what I mean by that is we're not here to pick winners or losers. What we're here is to argue for access and to allow for the fiduciary process that was contemplated under ERISA to work and to not be interfered with by the U.S. government.
Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies were a big news story, right? Not too long ago about them being offered in 401k plans and these retirement plans. What's the ARA's thoughts on that topic?
The fiduciary process is going to ensure that the right kinds of investments are included in retirement plans. There may be a time where crypto, as part of a multi-asset class portfolio of investments, makes sense. We would certainly not be the ones to decide you should never do that. Ooh, or, oh God, it's great. Go for it. That's the point. The government isn't the one to decide, is in the worst position to decide what, do this or do that. We don't want politically driven investing. We want principle-based, long-term investing based on a strong principle-based fiduciary process. That's the best result for participants and beneficiaries, and that's what we stand for. So, if you ask my personal view, making sure that having a product that's regulated, which I'm assuming the crypto legislation at some point is going to happen, that's going to be the pathway potentially. But I would not certainly want to say in the future it won't make sense, because that's the point. It may make sense for plan fiduciaries over time, and we don't want to be the ones to decide. Rather, the fiduciary process works, and it should always be free to make the best choices for participants and beneficiaries.
I can appreciate you just sharing all of these moving pieces that I feel like a lot of plan sponsors, for example, perhaps don't fully comprehend because you'll have participants saying, "Well, I want. How come I can't? I read in CNBC that I can do crypto, and how come our plan doesn't offer?" You know what I mean? So that education part, which your organization does very well, that's so crucial, and that's such a big portion of why you're.
But you're raising an incredibly important point. There are a lot of options out there. You've got Robinhood, you've got other options for younger workers. As an industry, the 401k or 457 or 403b, we have to keep up. I mean, to say that, oh, well, you can't do that or you can't do this, you know, they're going to look at you as the OG. And so that's why my answer to the previous question was what it was. I think the 401k shouldn't be the leader, but it shouldn't completely ignore developments in investing. And that's the part that we need to continue to be free to do so. But I think it's also important to continue to recognize the importance of evolving in many places. And I've said this publicly. So we are using an investment methodology that the same of that we were using in the 1980s and 90s. You've got your classes of investments. And I think those are the kinds of things that constantly need to be, revisited and evaluated. Does it still make sense? And obviously, we've got the advents of target dates. There's a large interest now in income solutions.
Mhm.
Organizations like the one you work for have been way ahead of the curve on those things for a long time. I think the private sector needs to catch up on that. But I think also that we need to continue to try to innovate in the retirement plan sphere so that we are attractive to younger workers. I think the other thing that we need to try to address is the technology challenge that we have in our industry, because we're still using, I kind of joke, a Windows 95 record keeping system. My employees, they come in and like, how come I can't figure out what's happening in my plan until like the next day? Of course, that's led to some challenges in terms of being able to use ETFs in retirement plans. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we need to constantly be thinking about. How do we improve our system? Because that's ultimately going to be better for the participants and beneficiaries.
So when it's all said and done, how do you want people to remember Brian Graff, the person, not just the CEO?
That's a wonderful question. Think, it goes back to where I started. It isn't so much about me, but what we're able to achieve and making that difference. I hope that when I'm done, and I'm not done yet, but when I am done, I hope that people can say there were some amazing things that we got done and that it has made a real difference in people's lives.
Mr. Brian Graff, thank you for being on the podcast.